My name is Tronster, and you are at the professional AAA game developers reveal all panel. And you made it here, you're awake, and you're at MAGFest. So let's first give yourselves a round of applause.
Woo! MAGFest!
Pace yourself, stay hydrated. I'll let the panelists, we have 3 out of our 4 panelists here. I believe our 4th panelist may be trying to make his way up here, but the format we'll use for this is, actually I'll let the panelists introduce themselves first and then I'll explain the format.
Hey, my name is Samuel Batista. I worked in the AAA industry for about 10 years now, and I started off as a UI programmer and recently transitioned to doing more of web dev stuff, but still working in the game industry, which is cool.
Hi, everybody. My name is Frank Force. That is my real name. Sorry. Yeah, I've been doing AAA stuff for a long time, about 15 years, and I do a lot of indie stuff too. And recently quit my job to work full-time indie. I worked on some games you might have heard of, Doom, for example, Starhawk, Psyops, and Mafia 3. Oh, there's a lot of games. And yeah, looking forward to telling you more about it.
Hi, my name is Brett Doerle. I've been in the industry for about 14 years now. I'm a gameplay programmer at Wargaming.net.
All right, thank you all. Right now we're a little bit on the coding heavy. I know a lot of the coders up here have also done some art. Where hopefully our artists will be up here soon as well. But most everyone up here I think has dabbled in some way or another form other projects. So the format is each person will have an opportunity to talk about how they got into the game industry first so that you know what they were able to do to get in. Then we'll have a few questions, which I sourced from the IGDA beforehand. For those, real quick, with show of hands, who knows what the IGDA is? A few people, about maybe half the room. The IGDA is the International Game Developers Association. So if you want to get plugged into whether it be the indie scene or the AAA game space, look up the IGDA. It's full of a lot of chapters where local meetups occur, and a Discord server just got launched a few months ago. And so some of these questions came from a discussion on the Discord server. And then also at the very end of that, we'll then open it up to any additional questions that we didn't have asked early on. You'll be able to ask time permitting. So sound like a plan? All right, see the nod of heads? Great. So our first story then is Brett.
So about 14 years ago, I got my first job, well, my only job at Day One Studios. They were best known for making Mech Assault and Mech Assault 2. That was the first job I got out of college, and now we were purchased by Wargaming several years ago, so it's the same studio. I went to a college called Full Sail. It's a small school in Florida. Specializes in various entertainment degrees. I went for game development and design. I spent a lot of extra time learning extra things like DirectX. They only taught us OpenGL at the time, building on other projects and things like that. Eventually, after I graduated, spent about 4 months sending out resumes and interviewing, and eventually got my job at Day One. Sort of combination of luck and being prepared. I applied for a position that was not posted. Well, I applied for a position I was not qualified for. They had positions for entry level that were not posted. Because I had applied early, they took my resume, they interviewed me, and they said I was the first person they interviewed that came from a game school that sounded like they knew what they were talking about, so they gave me a shot, and I've been there ever since.
Sweet. Now throw out some of the questions to any of the panelists. First one is, today, what do you consider is AAA?
Well, I think the lines have been blurred quite a bit. There's a lot of really great game engines now, like UE4, Unity. So the division between AAA and single A, double A, whatever, indie dev is, I think, a lot more blurry. But I think the main thing is just money. Like, if a project costs a ton of money and it has a lot of people on it, then it's AAA. Like, that's really, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I have my own method. Basically, if your team is under 10 people, you're single A. If your team is from 10 to 100 people, you're double A. And if your team is greater than 100 people, you're probably triple A. I mean, you could also do the same thing with money. Like, if your budget's less than $10,000, you're single A. If your budget's between $10,000 and $100,000, you're probably double A. And if your budget's more than, well, let's say, under $1 million, you're double A. If you're more than $1 million, you're probably triple A.
In that case, can your game change which A it is in?
Well,
Sure.
yeah, you're expected to. Your
Why not?
team is going to grow. Like most teams will start out at like 10 people or less, and then possibly grow up to be over 100. But team size is, of course, directly related to money because you have to pay these people. So and how much money you spend is really, it's not. But what I'm saying is, it's less about quality. And it's the same thing Sam said. It's about just team size and money, which is a good thing for you guys because if you're making an indie game, you can make a high quality indie game now that is very nice looking.
And doesn't cost that much to make.
And yeah, it doesn't cost a ton.
And so it's good. There's some controversial views, and nothing here is gospel, but it is important knowing that you're all from being in the industry. This is how your view, likely some of your coworkers' view would be. Has anything changed? Like, is AAA the same today as it was many years ago? As a brief example, like way back when Civ 5 was coming out, I had some coworkers who said Civ 5 was not, to them, they didn't consider it to be a AAA game. It would be a Call of Duty or something would be more AAA, and I think it's AAA. But I don't know. What are your feelings between games back then and today?
The line is definitely very different now than it was. You used to have your big market games, and those would be the ones who would always be successful. But over the past 10 years or so, some of the biggest games have been started by very small teams and have become successful. Like Minecraft was one person and is now one of the biggest selling games of all time. Is that AAA? Now it is. Microsoft has tons and tons and tons of people working on it, but when it started, it wasn't.
Yeah, same thing with like Rocket League, for example. It definitely exploded in popularity. Like, you would look at that game and call it, is this a AAA game? Like, sure looks like it, and has the following behind it. Probably has the team size behind it. But when it first came out, it was much smaller than what it is now.
A controversial thing here. If a company is only 10 people or so, but they're willing to put $50 million behind the marketing budget, not even development, just to market the game, can a giant marketing budget make a game at that point? Would that be considered AAA because of the investment by the publisher? Does it make a difference?
Sure.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, because these it's just a bunch of letters like A, AAA, AA. It doesn't mean anything. There's great games can be made by that team of 10 people. They can be a team of 100 people. That's why I feel like the definition, it used to be quality. It used to mean like AAA was like a high quality game. But like now it's some of the best games are not AAA. So I think it really is mostly about money. And obviously the marketing budget is, for most games, at least half of your budget is the marketing budget.
Also, some of its accessibility, 10 years ago, you had to go to a store to buy a physical product. And so there had to be some amount of backing by somebody to print those discs and put them on the store shelves in a store to be interested in the games. Whereas now a small game can be distributed digitally with almost no upfront cost to it, and so it can become much larger than it had the chance of being a long time ago.
Yes, that's a good point.
Okay, and this is the last question for AAA, and then we'll start moving on to another area, topics, is what is the most important aspect of AAA today? And we kind of touched on this today. I don't know if anything you wanted to add, or if we feel like
You probably have a
this
bit
to
more job security.
Oh.
Well, I mean, as far as coming from an employee, you have temporary job security. Yes. And you probably will make a good amount of money, at least while you're working there, to save up when you do get laid off, because there's a pretty good chance that'll happen. But I think the most important of aspects, AAA, is, or should be at least, trying to do something that you cannot do without that amount of money and size of team. Like take for example, like Red Dead or GTA. Like those games are just so massive. The scope is just so massively huge that you cannot possibly make this game with a smaller team. And that to me is what really is at the heart of the best AAA games.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you because when you play a really awesome game that feels like more than the sum of its parts, you know, like even if it's a small team working on it, but it's really ambitious, you really get that feel. Like I've been playing Hollow Knight recently, and that game blows my mind, just how filled with content it is made by a small team. I wouldn't call it a AAA game, but I definitely give it major props.
Sweet. All right. So our next developer story of the secret of how they broke into the game industry will be Frank.
Oh, great. Okay, I wrote down a couple notes. So I went to college for computer science, and there wasn't like a special game like track at that point. It was about 20 years ago, so it was a while ago. There were a couple I took everything I could that would help me. I took a graphics class. I took like networking class. I also took a lot of stuff outside of computer science because, well, I'm a programmer, but there's a lot more to making games than programming. So I learned. I took classes on art. I took the full physics track, and so I did that. I went to school for computer science, but that's not. You don't have to do that, but it's a good start. So then I needed to get a job. I sent out so many emails. I literally made a list of like pretty much every game company that I could think of. It had over 100 game companies on it, just like every game company. Emailed every single one of them. And this is important. Like Brett said, like if you don't necessarily like look on the website and see, oh, there's nothing for my position available or whatever. Like send your stuff out anyway, because the best chance of you getting hired is them getting that resume before they even posted the position, because you're going to be the first one they contact. And so anyway, I sent out hundreds of emails, and I got like maybe 2 or 3 responses. And on top of the sending the emails, like there's a website, and I would check and apply if possible. But if there was nothing available, I'd still, email them. I got one response that finally wanted to interview me, so I drove all the way down from Rochester, New York, which is basically Canada, to New Jersey. And I was scraping change off the seats of my car to like get change for the tolls to get down there. I had nothing, man. And I drove down there, and luckily it was somewhat near where my parents live. They live in Philly. New Jersey is not that far. So I drove there, got an interview. It was a small company called Hypnotics, where they made their biggest game is Outlaw Golf. It's kind of a parody of Outlaw Golf. And the dude that's the president, Michael Taramikin, he now is in charge of the Tiger Woods golf games. But anyway, he hired me, and I worked there for a couple of years, and that's how I got in. And once you get in, you're kind of like golden. It's a lot easier to get another job after you've got into the industry.
Yeah, that last point seems key too. Did Brett, you and Sam both feel like once you got that first title shipped, that a bunch of doors opened just magically?
I don't even think you need to get your first title shipped. I think just having like a professional, real job to put on your resume makes a world of a difference. And I'll tell you guys more about my experience and how it mirrors your experience, Frank.
And there is nothing that recruiters love more than stealing someone from another job. So if you already have a job in the industry, they're going to want to steal you from that job to another possibly better job.
Okay, so let's get into some of the dirt, the nuts and bolts when working on a game. If you're making a patch for a game, like what is the process? Like what does it take to actually fix a bug in one of the games? Like why does it take so long sometimes?
Well, it depends on what the bug is, right? And it also depends on your systems that are in place. The first patches are usually harder because you've never patched the game before. But a lot of it is engineering process. Some of it is, at Firaxis, you guys primarily do PC, but on the consoles, there's different patching processes you have to go through. You have to recertify your patches. At Wargaming, we have ways of fixing certain things in our game without going through the certification process, which is nice. But usually on the console, certification, at least on the last generation of games, the certification process was longer. On the new consoles, it's much quicker. You can usually get a cert done in 24 hours to 48 hours. But then it's figuring out and identifying the bug and then trying to fix the bug in a way that doesn't break anything else. And depending on what the issue is, that can be easier or harder depending on the situation.
Yeah, guys might not know this, but most games we're working on, there's like a bug database that QA testers or anyone will enter bugs into, and they'll like type up what the bug is and how to reproduce it. So when we get a bug, like the first thing we'll get a bug report, or they might say like start fixing bugs, whatever. So you get this bug report, and your first step is to reproduce the bug. Sometimes that's the hardest part. Once you can reproduce the bug, then you can try to fix the bug. And if it's your code, it might be easy. If not, it's programming. You got to figure out how it works, fix it, and then after you fix it, then there's a whole nother step of explaining to someone else how you fixed it and how the bug happened. Because you don't want to just check in something that kind of fixes it that no one. You really want to make sure that bug is fixed. So there's a whole lot of steps to it. And then after you get through all of that, and you get it checked in, you get it reviewed, then you get that added to the patch or the game or whatever.
I'm going to talk about game design for a second because I think that's it's more art than science. There's a lot that goes into video games, right? You have art, you have audio, you have code. Like there's a lot that goes into it. But what makes a game truly remarkable and memorable is the game design. All the parts work together to create an experience that's amazing, right? So when I worked on XCOM, for example, the game was going from, was experiencing a rapid iteration in the tactical portion. Like we had a strategy portion and a tactical portion. And the tactical is kind of like isometric camera, and the UI was being heavily modified, and we're trying to figure out how the abilities are going to show up on the screen, how you select things. Like there's a lot going on, but every day the lead designer was playing the game, right? Like he was experiencing the latest build, going through it, talking with other people who also played it, exchanging ideas and coming up with, all right, this is working, this is not working, and just iterating on that design. Like game design is so it's difficult to make a really fun game, and that's the part that I think is maybe a little bit underappreciated. Like when you have a fun prototype, a fun thing that you can show to people and they're like, this looks kind of rough, but look, it's fun. We can have a good time together. From that point, you have a foundation to build like a team or a studio or a game. Like if you don't have that fun thing that makes your game different and unique, like that, the hook or the idea, and if you can't demonstrate that, then you're really going to struggle, even if you're an amazing programmer or an amazing artist. Because at the end of the day, games are about systems and how they interact together. And to find a fun system, you really got to like iterate, play it over and over again, show it to people, see if they agree with you. And if they do, then you polish it. You keep working on it till it's a game, till it's amazing.
Okay, can you talk at all? I don't know if you can talk at all about like what you do at Big Huge, because that's very different since you're more of a live services with an iPhone game rather than having to go through a cert process with a publisher. Is that for something in terms of patches and game design? Do you have to do anything different that you found that you were not doing when you were working at one of your previous studios?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just want to preface by saying I got hired at Big Huge in February of last year. The game has been going on. The game that Big Huge is known for more recently is called Dominations. It's a free-to-play mobile strategy game. You build a base and then you go attack other players' bases, and it's very reminiscent of Clash of Clans. If you guys are familiar with that, it actually started off largely as a clone of Clash of Clans with like a historical theme, and then as time progresses, the game changes and evolved. But what I got hired to do is build tools to help people who build sales build lots and lots of sales that are specifically targeted to like a very specific subset of players. This is very specific to like free-to-play stuff. It's a different kind of business model, different market approach. But like Tronster said, since we just are a mobile game, you don't have to pass certification and get through this like gauntlet of testing from the platform holders. basically we send a new build to Apple or to Android, and usually within 24 to 48 hours, they'll tell us yay or nay. So fixing a bug can either involve like making a rapid change to the client so that you as the player would get to download a new version of the game through the App Store or whatever. But if it's a server-side bug, like, oh, in this one situation, we're not giving you the gold that you've earned or something like that, then sometimes the fixes can be made invisibly to you, right? Like the servers are just updated, but since we have 6 or 16 different servers, depending on how many players are playing, you will just kind of be moved from one server to the next almost invisibly without knowing. So one moment you're playing the game, then you go to another screen, and because going to another screen makes like a ping or a hello connection to the server, we'll just go, all right, this is the new server, go to that one instead, right? So even while you're playing the game, like in between screens, we could switch the server that you're connected to, and that one may have a fix or something like that.
So with these live updates, and even maybe more so with the certification process, it's certified that you've got a quality game. Our next question then is, why do games release with some bugs? Did QA miss them? And also, why are some critical bugs, why aren't they always fixed by launch?
Well, there's bugs everywhere. Like, it's impossible to fix every bug. But like I said, there's a database that we work through. And every bug, typically you'll mark it as like how important it is to fix that bug. And usually there's more bugs than we have time to fix. So there are some bugs that are super low priority. Maybe it's just like a visual thing, like this guy's hat is on backwards or something. And you might just be like, oh, well, that's just a visual thing. We have way more important bugs to fix. The critical bugs, I think, don't get fixed for 2 reasons. One is that they haven't properly tested everything with real players. Because once real players start messing around, they're going to do stuff that no one's ever thought of. And the second reason is sometimes you try to fix things at the last minute and you end up causing a worse problem. You know?
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Some of it is also scale due to the amount of content. Like in World of Tanks, we have several hundred tanks. It's very difficult in a test pass to test every tank on every level and every combination of tanks on every level. Or like in Grand Theft Auto, a game that big, testing everything every day is relatively difficult. And then also you run into other issues when you just have sheer numbers of players in the game. So I think we have maybe somewhere between 30 and 40 QA testers. And the entire studio is around 140 people, whereas we have many thousands of players playing the game. It's hard for us to emulate that many players hitting the server at the same time.
It's often hard to check the bugs too, like because they can come from anywhere. So you could change one little thing, and something completely unrelated could suddenly have a bug in it. And this is, and especially towards the end of development, where stuff is going in really fast, and they're trying to test it, but there's just stuff coming in too fast, and it's breaking things that they might have just tested yesterday. You know what I mean?
There's in my experience, there's always a push and pull between like what engineers would like to do and what the game designers want the engineers to do. So for example, the engineering team might think, oh, I really want to invest some time polishing up this feature or refactoring the code, making it smaller and cleaner. But the game designers really want the engineering team to focus on reworking this ability or reworking this thing. I've seen some studios, like through GDC talks and whatnot, that have made significant strides at making an improvement, shipping quality titles. For example, Sea of Thieves, they had an automated testing system where it would load into a really tiny map, for example, like a ship, and it would turn the wheel. Like there would be a script that turns the wheel, and then there would be a checker that would verify that the boat actually turned as a result of turning that wheel, and that the animation played. But like, that's a studio that's owned by Microsoft, and they had decided that no matter what, we're going to keep investing in this game, fixing the bugs and making it better, as opposed to changing some things up and implementing new features, because they were overly ambitious at the start and the game was really buggy and they were losing players left and right. Like, it's tough because it depends on where the game is at. If the game is not really fun yet, like you haven't really found the hook, the appeal, then it doesn't matter if you're fixing bugs, right? Because you're going to have a boring game. Nobody wants to play. But if you found the fun and you don't have the money or the resources to like invest in testing and lots of like human testers or lots of engineers to write automated testing, like then you have to kind of roll the dice and say, we're going to ship this title, instead of fixing all the bugs properly. It's always a balancing act. It's really tough.
Okay, now next question is a bit more of your opinion, but I'm sure a lot of people are going to be curious to what game developers think about this. What's the most frustrating lie that you see on the internet about professional game development?
I can't give specific examples. However, there's often a lot of times where people will get angry at the wrong people.
Okay.
Often there will be developers working around issues from a platform, and people get angry at the developer by trying to work around those when it's not the developer's fault, and vice versa. That's usually the biggest thing, is like when you know why things are the way they are and you see people get angry at the wrong thing, that's frustrating.
I think the most frustrating lie is that the game industry is like a hostile place to work. Like you always hear about like layoffs and crunches. There's always going to be an element of, oops, this team or this company did something really bad, and now their employees are paying the price and they're getting fired and all this stuff. But I think there's a lot of companies out there and a lot of professionals trying to focus on how do you make the quality of life good for the employees, for the people working on games, and also ship great games. Those two things, like, they're not mutually exclusive, I don't believe. But it is tough to strike that balance for sure, because there's so many things that go into making a game, from design, production, art, sound, etc. You gotta do it all well in order to not crunch and get compressed time schedules and whatnot. But I think increasingly the industry is doing a better job at avoiding crunch and putting out good games. And maybe when the games come out at first, they're not that great and they're maybe a little buggy, but over time they get better. And I think that's what we've seen recently, is like games as a service becoming more of a real thing, that games really do get better over time. A perfect example of that for me is like Apex Legends. When it first came out, it was kind of a disaster, buggy and awful to play. And now it's actually a really great game.
I really want to get a shirt. I'm gonna answer this myself. I want a shirt that just says "lazy developer" on it. 'Cause I think that's like the thing, the reason why the bugs are, of course, because the developers were lazy. So.
Typical.
Okay, next question we have is, with live streaming, how does this affect your day-to-day development of games? Like, has this changed, being in the industry for 10 or so years each, is this changed what game developers are going to have to do today? Has it already changed your job today, or is this like not really impacting you all in making games?
I think definitely it has. I mean, because when we're making games, like this was not something that we thought of before, but now we're thinking of not just someone playing a game, but someone watching someone playing a game, and someone possibly watching someone play a game multiple times or whatever. And we've had a lot of conversations about related to live streaming. There's integration you can put in your game so people that are watching can do things in your game or whatever. And just making your game more like stream friendly and making it more fun to watch and stuff on a stream has just been a really big push, at least the places I've been.
I'll tell you guys a couple of stories. At Firaxis, before I left, the company instituted a live streaming room so that the developers could have a more direct connection to the players and to their fans, and have like better production values around like updates. Instead of releasing a patch note, like, here's a list of things we changed, they actually put the developers in front of a camera, have them talk to the audience. Like, I think that was fantastic. At Big Huge, we also do that. Like, when there's a big update to the game, like a new age or something like that, we'll actually hire a live streamer to come into the studio. And again, we have a streaming room at the studio as well. And the community manager and several employees that were part of the design, part of that release, they'll sit together to play through the game. They'll answer questions. So that's a cool part. And I'll finish off by saying that it's actually becoming not just a tool to connect with audiences, but a tool to iterate on game design. Because recently at Big Huge, we announced a new title. It's called Arcane Citadel, and it had its soft launch. And part of the soft launch process involved paying people to play our game for like 30 minutes and then answer some questions. And we got recordings of these players. And we got like 5 or 6 of them. And you could see like, oh, this player really liked this. And you didn't have to be there, right? Like they just played on their phone on their own time. And we got their recordings, they're playing, of them playing the game. And because of that, some things changed and were iterated on.
It hasn't affected me at all. Oh. Other people at the studio that's affected, but I haven't been a part of that.
Spot on. Okay, with that, we'll go with potentially our last developer story here on how they broke into the game industry, and that's what Sam did to get here.
Cool. I actually shared a somewhat traditional trajectory to get into the industry. I also went to college for computer science. I went to Full Sail University, just like my colleague here. But the college selection isn't really it doesn't matter so much. Once you have a degree, whether it's art or computer science, you're going to be competing for that first job, that entry-level job. That's the hard part, right? Like getting that first job is excruciatingly difficult, and it can feel like, just kind of screaming into a black hole or sending resumes and emails into a black hole. So I'll tell you what I've done, or what I did to get that first job. The first thing I did was to, as part of Full Sail, you have a final project where it's like a team effort. Part of that final project, I learned a scripting language called Lua. And it's very popular in games. It's really easy to learn. I really recommend, if you guys are interested in programming at all, to look up Lua programming language. And we use that to script some behaviors in the combat system. Now, after I graduated, I sent out hundreds of applications. And the one that I got back, the response I got back, was because I had that Lua experience. It was a tiny microscopic company working out of Pittsburgh called Wild Pockets, and they were building a game engine that ran on the browser. So this was before Unity was popular and came out. They were like, hey, we're gonna make this game engine that's really easy to use. All you need is a web browser. And the scripting system was built on top of Lua. So they needed Lua developers to build the UI and build tools and make it easier to use and write tutorials and things like that. Somewhere along the lines, it became evident that Unity was dominating, and the game engine approach was not going to work because you had to download a plugin. This is back in the days where you downloaded plugins to integrate with browser, make custom browser stuff, and that wasn't working out. So the company that I was working with was only 6 employees, made a dramatic pivot, and they were like, hey, this Facebook thing is really big and it's growing, so I guess we should make Flash games on Facebook. So they asked me to learn Flash and 2 other employees because we were running out of cash. And I was like, great, I get paid to learn Flash. I wasn't getting paid much, but at least I had a job. And I learned to do some Flash, and I built this prototype. And then I did something that was key, and I recommend you guys always do this, which is update your resumes often, right? As soon as I learned Flash that same week, I was like, okay, let's put some Flash on my resume, right? And I updated my resume, I updated my LinkedIn, I added that skill category. Lo and behold, 3 weeks later, I get a call from a recruiter, and they're like, hey, we're hiring for Flash developers in Texas. And it was for this studio called Timegate Studios, which again was a terrible developer, and they, crunch was awful and all that stuff. But because I had that experience on my resume, they were willing to give me a shot. And that's where I ended up learning Scaleform and ActionScript development and the Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 3, because they were working on a shooter for Xbox Live Arcade. And then, yeah, once you have that first title on your resume, like an actual shipped game that you put on your resume, and the words Unreal Engine on your LinkedIn, right, like everything becomes a lot easier. From there, I got another call from a recruiter that got me into Firaxis. And then later, I learned some web dev stuff on the side because I felt like I needed to learn some new things. And that once I put it on my resume, a couple months later, got a call from a recruiter saying, hey, we noticed you have React and JavaScript on your resume, and you have some experience. We'd like to give you a job. So, like, the first job was super painful, hundreds of resumes, almost no callbacks. But once I got it, keep updating the resume, then I almost had to do nothing, right? Like, I didn't hunt for the other jobs, they hunted me because I had the skills that they were looking for. So I guess keep your antennas open for, like, what are skills that people are looking for. Oh yeah, and a couple of tools that I used were GameDevMap.net. I used that to find out all the places that were kind of relatively nearby my area that were hiring. I used that for my first job. And I always keep my eye on the Gama Sutra job board. GamaSutra.com has a job board, and I don't necessarily apply to jobs through Gama Sutra, but I just look to see how many engineering jobs there are, how many fit my skill sets, how many, I have no idea what they're asking for, right? Like, if they're asking for skills I never heard about, maybe that warrants a Google search, something like that. And yeah, I think that's about all I can think of.
Nice. I'll just add on to that, since I won't be sharing my story yet. It can sometimes be a sacrifice getting that first job in the industry. It may not pay that great. When I jumped over making software outside the game industry, I was making a very fat six-figure salary job and making backup software. And getting into the game industry, I made a third of what my previous salary was, and that was a sacrifice I had to make to get into the game industry, but I was no longer making backup software. So, I was working on Command and Conquer instead, so I think it was worth it. The next question for everyone then. I'm sure a lot of people are applying to studios you're at, or you see resumes come by, or you have students or indies coming to you. And so what do you think is like the biggest hurdle or gap that you see in like the portfolios of people who want to get into the game industry today, like who are seeking it out? What would you tell them? Or what don't you tell them because you can't, because they're trying to apply for a job, but like if you could now very candidly say to those people, what would you say?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that can go wrong with portfolios. I would say you don't want to put too much stuff in there. You want to put your best stuff, not everything, just your best stuff. But you also need to put enough stuff, because there's a lot of people that don't have enough stuff. So you need to hit that kind of sweet spot of having just a couple really good, because you could always show them more stuff once they're interested, like making a small games, whether it's a game jam or whatever, if you're either a designer or a programmer, and getting I love to see people that have made show me a game that you made, right?
Yeah, it depends on the position you're applying for. Like, if you want to be an artist in the game industry, obviously your portfolio is absolutely critical. I mean, it's got to look amazing. You know that. I would also say take it to the next level and like put some GIFs on your website or on your portfolio of, maybe if you're not an animator, you just like do stills, have a GIF of you working on the still, right? Like take like screen captures, because ultimately you're trying to capture people's attention. So you gotta have some motion helps with that, like bright colors helps with that. This is all again for artist people. If you're applying for a game design role, it doesn't matter what your game looks like, right? Like, it doesn't even matter that it's completed. It matters that it has a hook that I can play the game and be like, oh yeah, I get what this is about. It's not just a copy of something else, right? I want to see something creative and something unique as a game design, for a game design position. For a programming role, what I look for above all is knowledge of the fundamentals, right? Like, if you're a college graduate, I think you have a lot that you can show by saying, hey, I understand what a pointer is, what the memory address is, like this is what a class means. If you don't know these fundamentals, then it's going to really be hard to like learn, because programmers are like, there's a lot that you could do. There's a lot of different disciplines in programming. So I just want to know that you can learn and that you can grow. The best way to do that is to show me kind of a breadth of work, and yeah, be able to talk about the basics of like computer architecture, basically.
Don't put everything on your resume or in your portfolio. If you've used a piece of software once, don't put it on your resume. If you've used a scripting language for one particular project in school, don't put it on your resume, because if you do get an interview, you will be asked about everything on your resume, and if you can't answer questions about things on your resume, you will not get the job.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first fight here, because I think Sam
Yeah, I'm not
giving you
sure I agree
conflicting
with that.
information.
You know, I would say, and I've always advised this to people that I work with in their resume, be confident in your resume. Don't feel like everything on your resume, if someone asks you about that, you don't have to be an expert in it, you know, but make sure that if someone asks you about, you know, Lua, you better say, yeah, I did a little project in Lua, I know this and that, you know, whatever. But definitely don't put something on there that you've just done for a tiny little project, and they'll ask you what Lua is, and you'll be like, I don't know anything about that, because it's gonna look terrible, you know.
Yeah.
I also wanted to say, if you're a designer or a programmer, you really have to make a game, even if it's a small game. Like, one of the hardest things for me to hire, it's hard for me to hire someone if they've never made a game, even a really small game, because it makes me just wonder, like, do they really care that much? Like, you could make a game in a couple days. I'm not looking for the next big thing. I'm just looking to know that you can make a small game. You know, that's all. And that, for me, as a hiring manager, is really, really key. Not for everybody. Obviously, you don't expect an artist to make a game, and a designer, the programming is going to be a lot more simpler. And for the programmer, the art and stuff is going to be more simple, or whatever. Or maybe you're in a team, whatever. Just make a small game. That's all.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And for the skill in the resume, like, I agree and disagree. Like, if you've only worked on one project that had Lua, for example, or some other piece of technology, it depends on how deep you went into that, right? Like, if you worked for 5 months and you've read the Lua manual, like, up, like, from the top to bottom, like, a couple times, or had to reference it multiple times, and you feel confident that you could answer pretty much anything somebody throws at you, yeah, go ahead. Like, if you've only worked on it once, but you can explain to somebody asking questions about it, yeah, I worked on it once, but I was the go-to guy for this. Like, I answered all the questions, I solved all these problems. There's no problem with that. But if you've only completed like a couple of courses on like Code Academy or something, or just read a tutorial or written a Hello World program, yeah, you know, don't put that on there, because if you're going to be grilled on your resume, that's really the key of the recruiter or of the person like doing the job interview, is to make sure that you know what you're talking about and that the resume represents you, your skills. So, yeah.
And I want to speak to anyone in the audience who may be looking towards the AAA industry on the art side. I think everything said here is true. Like, don't have a million things in your portfolio, but have your best work. Keep it up to date. One of our former art directors at Firaxis, Greg Firsch, he runs a lot of panels at the Game Developers Conference, and he's constantly telling artists, like, you know, well, I don't want to speak for him, but I've heard the term that an artist will say, like, oh, I left this in here. I did that 5 years ago. It's not my best work. And it's like, well, why is it in the portfolio? If you have to make an excuse for your art that you're putting in there, it should have not been there in the first place. And that's a big mark. So I keep that in mind whenever I'm looking at UI artists who, or UI designers who are looking to get in. I want to see the best work, but don't fill me up with everything. If it's good, I'll ask to go and see some more.
If you're an artist or a musician and you don't know how to make the game and you just want to do the art or the music, the sounds, whatever, there are so many people out there that are looking for help making their games. You know, look around, reach out to people, make friends, and because if you can do a little bit of art for a game as an artist, that's so great, because it's not just that I saw that you did the art, it's that I saw that you worked with these other people and you made decisions and you probably argued and came to compromises, and those are the things that are great to see as a team, because you're going to be working in a team when you're in a game studio.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to ship the game either. I had a friend of mine who worked with me on prototypes for games, and he used the art from the prototype to get his first paid gig working for somebody who built games full time. Like, that was an amazing experience for him.
Oh, also, if you make 3D models and stuff, there's ways to show your 3D models on like a website where you can like see the 3D model and spin. Maybe you guys know about that, but make sure you have that set up, because it's so much better than just seeing an image, you know. And like when you have your 3D model, you're probably going to have your different maps, your texture maps, your like bump map and all that stuff, so people can see your actual work, how it works out too, and the wireframe, all that stuff.
Okay, we've got so maybe 2 more questions. I keep raising the level of difficulty in them, and then hopefully we'll have some time to hit the Q&A questions in the last few minutes. So the question is, what's the hardest you've ever had to crunch? Was it worth it, and would you do the same today?
On Fracture, I did 70 to 90 hour weeks for about 9 months straight. That was the first game I worked on. I was learning a lot, and it was worth it because I learned a lot about a lot of different parts of the engine, helped build a lot of things in the engine. Part of the reason why I worked so much was voluntary, because I wanted to learn. I had nothing else to do at the time. So if I was still that young, I would probably have done it again, but at this point, I probably physically can't do that much crunch again. We have not had to do that type of crunch at Wargaming in the past 6 years, nearly as bad.
Yeah, I mean, I crunched pretty hard at a couple places. Usually it goes for a couple months, 3 or 4 months, and it's pretty much just every day. You go in the morning, you work all day. They'll buy you dinner, you know, but they'll buy you dinner as long as you stay late. You stay late, you go home, you go to sleep, come back to work the next day. Saturday and Sunday, same thing, you know, for a couple months. Was it worth it to me? I think so. I was young at the time, and if you are young, you don't have a family, you don't have kids, you will learn really fast, and you kind of get a badge of honor, I guess, or some bullshit like that. But having done it, and you'll learn a lot. It's obviously you're working like twice as much as you normally are, so that's okay. Also, like if you're one of the times I was crunching, I actually got paid hourly, so that's obviously great, because I was like, hey, I'll crunch as much as you want. You're gonna pay me to work late, twice as much, like double time, or not, I think time and a half or whatever for past 40 hours. That is amazing if you can land it. Anyway.
I've had good and bad crunch experiences, and I know there's no good crunch, but like there's really terrible crunch, and then there's like crunch that doesn't feel as life-sucking, you know, like like these 2 gentlemen said, that, you know, the payoff is worth it. When I was working at Timegate, there was this culture of crunch because the studio was running out of money, but they weren't open about it. They were just like, oh, we're just doing crunch because, you know, we really need to hit the cert milestones, and if we don't, then, you know, we're not going to be able to ship the game. So yeah, everybody please crunch. And we would crunch and work ridiculously long hours, and then like the milestone would go past, and they would say, oh, I'm sorry, we just need to crunch another like 2 months because now we're delayed the launch, but we're gonna shoot for the Xbox Live Arcade like summer promotion. It's gonna be great. We're gonna make all this money. It's gonna be awesome. And you know, lo and behold, we reached that milestone, and they delayed that again. Like it was crunch for like a year straight. And at the end, they had this lavish big party, and guess what? The game flopped. It was terrible.
Yeah, life is more important. Life is more important, people.
Yeah. On the other hand, I worked on XCOM 2. We had a pretty bad crunch because, you know, we had creative leads, like we had the project changed hands. We had a creative director, and then it changed mid-cycle, and like the design really changed a lot. So we had a lot of room, a lot of ground to cover. And I just remember like waking up in the morning, walking to work, and like put the soundtrack of the game while I'm working on my phone. Like, you know, get in the zone, get in the space. Like I'm working on XCOM. Like this game is awesome. I love it. I love the game. I don't care that it's like taking forever and I work really late. I mean, I did care a little bit, but at the same time, the end product was great. Like it was a great game. It was probably the first game, other than the first XCOM, that had really great reviews when it came out that I worked on. And it made me feel really good to be part of that, like, you know, developer community, that team that put that together, working hard with everybody in the same office and, you know, just doing our best. But would I do it again? I would never do that time gate thing again because it was just kind of disrespectful the way that they were deceitful about it. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's the worst thing. If your management team is transparent with you and they're saying, hey, we don't really know how long we're going to crunch, so we're trying to do X, and X is really specific. And then once X happens, everything goes back to normal. Mm-hmm. All right, you know, I could see a good case for that. If the team is wishy-washy about, oh, we don't have this money, or they use the guilt card, like, oh, if you want to make, don't you want to make the best game ever? Mm-hmm. Don't you want to like just make a great game and have it on your resume? Like, if they say like to try to manipulate your emotions, like if that happens, get out of there.
Start applying elsewhere.
It's a trap. It's a trap.
In lieu of the last question, I'll talk a little bit about my experience and give a chance for Bobby to come up here too, so he can go and tell his story, because he's a true artist, and we're more on the ones and zeros. So just a note, when I got into the industry, I got out of making backup software. The Command & Conquer was an EA product, and this is during the time of EA Spouse. By show of hands, has anyone heard of EA Spouse, the stuff that happened? Okay, a few people. It was basically a letter to the community about how overworked a spouse was from an EA project. We crunched on Command & Conquer 3 on Kane's Wrath, but the studio was great, and the leads were great. And they were able to mitigate it by making a rule that we were only crunching every other week so people could still have a life. Like, we knew we couldn't do it with just 40-hour weeks, but you know, I'm fresh in the industry, and it's like I'm hitting 45 hours a week, and they're like, Tronster, go home. I'm like, no, next week we're going to crunch. Go home this week. So there are tricks if you have an experienced team and if they care about the people and they're not trying to manipulate their emotions to help alleviate the crunch that may exist inside the industry. But with that, turn it over to Bobby to talk about his experience and how he got into the industry.
Tronster, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me.
Bring it closer to you.
Yeah, I'm going to feel a little low.
Yeah, first and foremost, don't trust Google Maps because, yeah, it's going to get you late. Apologies for everybody being a little late, but thank you guys for having me again. I appreciate it. My story is a bit unusual, how I got into the industry. I took the long way around, I guess, looking back, but still it was educational, and I learned a lot. I knew I was going to be an artist ever since I was little, and drawing, and it was a thing that was a passion of mine, and I just wanted to pursue it. And at a point where young adulthood, I knew that, hey, I can take this talent and make a little bit of money. I can get paid for what I love to do. Okay, so the first point or first professional gig that I got was in the comic book industry, and I was a penciler, and I was cranking out pages and trying to make deadline, and they want pages as of yesterday. So it was a thing for me. I was constantly pushing and not getting any sleep, and I was just like, I'm killing myself. This is not worth the money. The juice is not worth the squeeze, so I got to find something else. I found out about 3D. And it was a thing where some years had passed, and I was working at Verizon. I was in the corporate office, and it was a job. I was punching numbers, but I found out about 3D, and I said, "Oh, this is kind of cool. This is kind of cool." And I was looking at things at the time. Movies were coming out that they were starting to incorporate CG into the actual film and for the FX, and I'm like, I like that. I want to get into that. So with that, I was teaching myself. Oh gosh, I downloaded Maya. I'm not going to say how I did it, but and fell in love. And the funny thing about it, when I was working with Maya, I had avoided geometry in high school like the plague, only to have forced myself now, because learning Maya's geometry based. So I'm like, great, now I've got to learn geometry, okay. But that's cool, because it's still art related. Then this wonderful gift from the artistic gods came out called ZBrush. And I'm like, oh, I know this. I sculpt, and I could segue all my principal skills, all my fundamental skills, and they translated directly into ZBrush. And having forced myself to learn Maya, I also had that technical knowledge in regards to UV layouts, what vertices were, what edge loops were, how to correctly make an edge flow for an animator so they don't get pissed at you. There's a lot of things that, but with the combination of the two, I was like, okay, I can do a little something. So I made a name for myself on the web. Facebook, I was kind of spamming my art everywhere so someone could see me, because I didn't have a formal education. This is all self-taught. And lo and behold, all the groups I was basically, hey, you want to see my artwork? If not, oh, that's all right. Here you go anyway. Look at that. Lo and behold, a friend of mine, or who's now a friend, she was in a Facebook group called the People of 21234, and that's a zip code for Parkville. That's where I grew up. And hometown girl, and she's like, she pinged me, sent me a PM, and she said, is this your artwork? And it was a Venom post I put out, because I knew everyone knows the character and he's pretty popular. So I'm like, yeah, that's my artwork. And she was kind of cute, so I researched who she was. So I was like, so I wanted to see, and I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe I can get some digits and holler at her. So she's like, well, I work at HR for one of the big gaming studios in Hunt Valley. I'm like, oh, this is even better. She wants me for my talent. So I'm like, yeah, okay. And she said, there's a couple slots opening up, and your work looks pretty good, and are you looking to get into are you available currently? I'm like, yes. And are you looking to get in the gaming industry? And I'm like, that'd be awesome. Lo and behold, Tess got me in. She got my work in front of the lead artist there, and they were looking at my work and how the company where I work, how they go about things. Everyone on the team looks at your work and evaluates you. So it was a situation where if no one likes you, you don't get in. So if you get a thumbs down from anybody, they're not having you. So luckily the team, they approved the work, they liked the work, they said, oh, this cat can sculpt. That's cool, yeah, let's get him in. So I got the phone interview from my lead, and she has a thick Ukrainian accent. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but with the culture where she comes from, it's very cut and dry. And as you can see, I come with a lot of zest, a lot of personality, character. She wasn't having any of that. So I'm trying to razzle and dazzle her and give her, the how I feel about the industry. And she's like, yeah, okay. Moving on. I'm like, oh, wow. So after I got a phone conversation with her, came around, and I had to call a girlfriend at the time to get some consolement because I was feeling real bad. I was like, I don't think I got this job. This lady was real rough. Lo and behold, I got the phone call. I was working at CarMax at the time. And I got the call from Zenimax, and they said, we want you for an on-site interview. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, what's Zenimax, though? And one of my managers at CarMax, he comes to me and he's like, Bobby, you don't know who Zenimax is? What are you doing? He said, man, hold on. Let me put it into your terms where you can understand. Think of yourself playing a pickup game of baseball with your friends at Villa Cresta Elementary School. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he said, you go home, and the next day, the New York Yankees are knocking at your door. I'm like, oh. It's a pretty big deal. Okay, let me do some research before I go to this on-site interview.
Bobby, unfortunately, we're technically out of time. I don't know if you could do a quick.
Yeah. I'll wrap up. It was a long way around, but through perseverance and just determination, and because I love doing what I do, I got lucky. But people saw my passion, and they wanted me in as a part of the team. And I've been there for the past 3 years now.
That's awesome. Thank you. As we are out of time, so we can't do any audience Q&A, but we will, if it's okay, hang out outside Mage's one panel right here, and feel free to go and ask any of our panelists any questions. So thank you all for being here and talking about it.